Hello, and welcome everyone to the Accenture Acceleration Event Series, Part 2. This is Work Life Reimagined. I am Rachel Jarvis Bossard, Partner Success Manager at the Mom Project, advocating for our moms, what we call dadvocates, allies, and our diverse talent in the contingent space. Joining me today, I have Amanda Kranz, who's the Managing Director at Accenture Interactive, and Martha Cotton, Design and Global CoLead at Accenture Interactive. And I will let them go in further in introducing themselves. Amanda, Martha.
Sure, I can get us kicked off. So, hi everyone, Amanda here. I'm coming to you today from Wisconsin. We're on spring break with the kids, so apologies in advance if they make guest appearances. I lead our design practice in the Midwest for Accenture Interactive, and we do a lot of work that's really focused on, taking a human-centered approach to really complex business problems. So I love what I do. It's so much fun. And Fjord Trends are honestly amazing. They're so much fun. And I'm going to hand it off to Martha because she is the brain behind Fjord Trends.
One of the brains. Thanks, Amanda. It's so great to be here. Martha Cotton, everyone. I'm calling you from Deerfield, Illinois, several miles north of Chicago. And I am, as mentioned, the global co-lead for Fjord, which is the design practice that's part of Accenture Interactive. And my favorite thing I get to do is be the co-author of our annual trends report, which we're really proud and excited to bring you today. I'm an anthropologist by training, and so I've spent my whole career studying people and cultures and understanding what matters to people. And you'll see that in ample evidence in our trends report. I'm also a mom to two. I'm staring empty nesthood in the face. Actually, tomorrow night, we're leaving to go look at colleges with my youngest. She's a junior in high school. So that's a whole other thing. But I have a son and a daughter, and they still keep me on my toes, even though they're pretty grown up.
Thank you. We are pleased to have both of you to share the Fjord Trends today. Fjord Trends today. Learned that earlier. Amanda, Martha, you guys are going to present kind of an overview of the findings, and we have some slides, so happy to just dive into that and take a good look.
Great. Well, I think so. Amanda and I are going to kind of tag team this. I'll kind of introduce what they are and introduce what we call a meta theme, and then we'll trade back and forth talking through the trends. So, as I mentioned, we write an annual trends report. We've been doing it for about 15 years. And these are trends that look at how people are engaging with technology and with digital around the world, or actually really how people are engaging with the world. It's very much a people-first perspective on what is happening. So don't think of these as tech trends. Think of these as human trends, and they really help us understand what we should be thinking about in terms of products, services, brands, experiences, now and in the near future. These are intended to be kind of close in trends. This is not, colonizing Mars trends. This is like things to be thinking about right now. And they are global. So we are fortunate, Amanda and I, to work for a global design team. There's about 2,000 designers all around the world in every corner of the globe, except Antarctica. And so we are able to leverage that amazing team as we start to do our trends evidence gathering, which we do every summer. We really reach out to our team and ask them to send us the signals that they're seeing from their parts of the world. So they are truly global. And one of the things that is the most gratifying, I think, of the whole experience for me is when we do this research, we start to see how much we have in common, which, boy, is that a message that's really nice to think about, especially of late. But you start to hear that, a team in Dubai is seeing this, and it's very similar to what a team in Dublin is seeing and what a team in Detroit is seeing. So it's just really, really amazing to see what we all have in common. And those really are surfaced in the trends. So if you go to the next slide, as we do every year, when we start I mentioned we kind of gather all the evidence, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of synthesis. And as the trends themselves start to emerge, we also start to see a meta theme that kind of cuts across all of them. And the meta theme for this year, for 2022, we call the new fabric of life. Now, it's kind of interesting. I think everyone knows that we've collectively, globally, been through a trauma. The global pandemic is it's not a generational thing. It's a once in a century kind of experience that we globally have gone through, not necessarily together, but we have felt the impact of the pandemic, each in our own way. And I use the word trauma not lightly. Clearly, the pandemic has created trauma for many, and it's done it in profound ways and in mundane ways. I mean, I feel very fortunate myself that I was able to remain employed during this time. I stayed healthy. My family stayed healthy. But still, the disruption to our life is still felt, no matter how you sort of fall on that spectrum of trauma. But we're not just talking about the pandemic here. We're talking about the aftermath of this kind of massive shift that everyone has gone through. Now, last year, our meta theme for our trend report for 2021, we said was called Mapping Out New Territories. And what we said is like, look, this is a new world that we're kind of all standing in. We're standing in the middle of a map that is actually getting drawn as we live it. And we saw an actual really opportunistic and optimistic opportunity to draw the map together in new and exciting ways, draw for inclusivity, draw for equity. And so we're saying now, okay, the map is starting to become a little clearer, but what we're all doing now is we're rethinking and re-examining all of our relationships as we're in this new map. And as we're doing that, we're knitting together a new fabric of life. And when I talk about relationships, I'm talking about, yes, our relationships to those whom we may live with or within our communities, but I'm also talking about our relationship to our employer, to our doctor, to the brands and products and services that we engage with. People are fundamentally rethinking all of these relationships. So we are knitting together a new fabric of life that's going to be sustaining us for the next several years. So think of this as maybe reflective of, yes, a lot of what we've been through in the pandemic, but certainly leverages the things that we saw pre-pandemic that were slow sort of drumbeats around sustainability, around inclusion and diversity, around personalization, around the metaverse, slow drumbeats that just absolutely accelerated due to a lot of the constraints of the pandemic. So think about this new fabric of life and the idea of our relationships and all being under increased scrutiny as we talk through the rest of the trends. So the next slide just shows you a bit of an overview of the 5. Anything you want to add on the meta theme, Amanda, before I turn it over to you to do Come As You Are, the first trend?
No, I mean, the meta trend this year, I felt like really hit home for me, just because I think everyone looks back at the last 2 years and we're like, was that one giant year, or were those 2 separate years? And I find myself continually mixing up whether something happened in 2020 or 2021. And I think there's just so much cognitive disarray that's happening. And so this set of trends really starts talking and getting into like, how is this starting to manifest itself? I think, especially for the crew on this call, if you had kids during the pandemic, like it was, tricky regardless of what age they were. And I think we've all grown a lot. We've all learned a lot. We're all really damn tired. So there's just a lot that you'll see this common thread throughout each of these trends. And I think there's so much that we can glean from these. And it really did force me to kind of look inside and say, oh my gosh, all of these I have some level of personal experience with. All right. Let's progress to trend 1, Come As You Are, if you want to go to the next slide. I love this one, especially for this group, because if you think about, the new fabric of life, people are really thinking differently about their sense of agency over their own lives. I think we all had to learn to speak up and advocate for ourselves during this time of like, if I've got kids at home, I need to have different working hours, or like there are specific times when I need to get my kids, to virtual learning, or, like this is just not going to work for me. I need to ask for different things from my employer. So like and every year we have a trend that does focus a little bit more on the employer employee relationship. And I think with the Great Resignation this last 12 months, basically, you're seeing a lot of that come to fruition because people are saying like enough is enough. One, I want something totally different for my life. Two, I want to choose something that better fits with my lifestyle and the life I want to live. And three, if my employer is not going to give me that, I have these bargaining chips to take to 100 other companies that will be willing to be more flexible about I need to be remote versus needing people to travel or be in the office. A lot more employers are thinking creatively about, should I provide some type of childcare services? Should I provide learning services for people's kids? Is there more of a health and wellness play as well? I know mental health has been a huge part of this, and we have a trend later on called Take Care that really focuses on kind of the rise of really wellness and that being a positive impact of all of this. But I mean, if you think about it, our relationship with our employers had to change over the last 2 years because we started working and living in the exact same location. And there's always going to be friction points there. So I think one thing to take away from this trend is, think about what it would take for you to show up and kind of exercise your own sense of agency. Like, what are the conditions that need to be true for you to show up with an employer and create the right conditions for you to be successful and have the life that you want to have and need to have. And right now is the time to kind of leverage those bargaining chips, because the other thing that has happened throughout all of this is that, and Martha touched on kind of the, explosion of focus on DE&I. They need, like, corporations need more women in the workforce. They do. And they're, really excited and open to it now. I don't think everybody knows exactly how to do it right. So we're seeing some of that as well. But right now is kind of the time to exercise that agency for yourselves and ask for what you really want. If you think about how this has manifested itself across various industries, there's a huge labor shortage. People, there are attractive offers everywhere, but especially if you look at, the retail industry, for example. I just read an article this morning that said Walmart has 50,000 open recs right now. But if you think about it, there are people who left retail, either don't want to come back because, the conditions weren't comfortable for many people. So there are industries that are really having a hard time attracting people to work. So they have to think differently about, how do we start to attract people? Employee experience becomes something, in industries that typically haven't really cared about employee experience. The other thing that this has really brought about is a me versus we mindset. So whereas I think we were a bit more collective, we've all been individually sitting in our own homes and figuring out how we need to advocate for ourselves. And I think that that's a big deal. So when you think about how employers put together packages for people, even, at Accenture, we've done a lot more of this in the last year of kind of making exceptions for various types of benefits, because we need to attract the top talent, and we have to do that by figuring out what top talent wants and meeting them where they are. This has opened up a huge amount of career opportunities as well. So the other side of this is that there's a side hustle economy that's really sprung up. And I love this because this has been like really fun to watch on Instagram. I just basically told you how old I am because I spend all my time on Instagram. So you think about all the people, like social influencers, who are selling products, who are working with brands to sell products. That's been a huge shift in how brands are being brought to our attention. How we're falling in love with brands is through people who are essentially kind of striking out on their own because they're passionate about something. They want to make something really amazing. And we're seeing a lot more of that. If you look at the CPG space, there's a ton of new entrants into that space that are popping up at Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, others. And it's really kind of amazing to see. And then the other part of that is that companies have thought differently about what types of careers are available. So I was working with a company over the last 2 years that basically took their store employees, they sent them home with iPads, and it started a new career path for people to actually have virtual kind of styling appointments rather than having to work in the stores. So there's just a lot that's been happening in the space that gives, I think, a fair amount of excitement, but also a little bit of apprehension because, especially as a woman, kind of showing up authentically and kind of sticking up for here's what I need, it's hard to do. And I think thinking about what needs to be true for you to feel comfortable to do that is probably the first great step in that direction. All right. Oops. And I've supposed I should have said go to the next slide because we already kind of went over that. Let's go on to trend 2.
Sounds good. One of the things that I love about the trend 1, come as you are, is just the idea of coming as you are. Amanda just mentioned sort of the bravery it might take to kind of show up as you are unapologetically. One of my favorite examples of this was just sort of a minor thing that was just a great small example. I was doing some research last summer on brand purchase decisions and what drives people's decisions. And I was just talking to this one woman who basically was describing herself, and she described herself as a vegan, except she does eat bacon on Sundays. And to me, just sort of that unapologetic, like obvious contradiction, but so what? This is who I am. Take me as I am. And I think that, it's just sort of her own unapologetic sense of agency, of this is me, this is how I show up, don't put me in a box, I think is sort of one of the key messages there, that people are no longer willing to be put in a box, which I think is really exciting. Okay, so the next trend we call the end of abundance thinking. Notice the question mark at the end of the title, because we still think a lot is getting sorted out here. But if you go to the next slide, I think one of the ways that we know that there's a true signal for a trend is when things like late night comics are starting to tell jokes about the supply chain. My 94-year-old mother knows what a supply chain is. I mean, this is something that she would not have known a year ago. So what's happening in this trend is that it really is about addressing the scarcity and the idea that we need to be challenging our own sense of abundance thinking, which is the thinking that many in the Western world for sure have gotten used to being able to say we can get what we want when we want it. Now, certainly to even occupy abundance thinking is to come from a place of privilege, but it has absolutely infected our entire sort of ways that we show up and engage with the world. It's driven very heavily by abundance thinking. So Amanda already talked about worker shortages, supply chain disruptions, as I referred to earlier with the late night comic jokes, emptiness on shelves, climate change disasters have just radically just come to the forefront of our human experience in a way, again, a slow drumbeat prior to last year, but just massively accelerated, partly due to a whole host of factors. But they really have started to challenge our own sense of abundance thinking and the need to start thinking about how can we design for scarcity? How can we learn that less does not have to equal loss? How can we examine supply chains for circularity and start to redesign them so that we can challenge against abundance thinking and start to design for scarcity? There's been many headlines around the worker shortage. That's the Ever Given container ship, very famously got stuck in the Suez Canal last March. Huge shortages around, the long supply chain issues that affect, the number of cars that are now available for sale, for example. And again, these issues have kind of dampened people's expectations. But also making us rethink what we mean by convenience and by speed. And so there's an opportunity there to kind of meet the moment where people are kind of starting to question and become more comfortable with challenging their abundance thinking. This, I think the other thing that's really fascinating with this trend is it has revealed to your everyday consumer how interconnected and interdependent we all are on each other and on this the way things kind of work throughout the world. This has just kind of risen to the surface and become much more, just a higher heightened awareness about this stuff. So here's one of my favorite examples of this interconnection. So the UK very famously had a massive shortage of fresh meat in its grocery store shelves. So here we go. A rise in gas prices forced the UK's largest fertilizer manufacturer to suspend production. So this, in turn, resulted in a sharp drop in the supply of one of the byproducts of that production, which is industrial CO2. And this then threatened the supply of items that are dependent on industrial CO2, which includes plastic wrapping, which is why there were fewer fresh meats plastic wrapped on UK grocery store shelves. So this kind of chain that, allows people to kind of like have an aha moment about how things get to me and how interconnected we all are. So I think this has really allowed people to see the impact of abundance thinking on the planet. And obviously there's been a tragic rise in natural disasters, wildfires, droughts, etc., just really straining many, many parts of the globe. And again, the scarcity, it's scary and it affects morale, but it also is an opportunity, like I said, to rethink our abundance thinking, to design for scarcity, and I think very excitingly to decouple innovation from new. Let's think about how we can innovate without introducing net new things into the world. So if you go to the next slide, I think that there's a couple of things to think about. There's certainly an urgent need for the coming together of various functions like marketing, customer service, and supply chain. And this kind of builds on a liquid infrastructure trend that we had last year, where we saw an opportunity for organizations to start to rethink their supply chains. This is like, we need to think about this coming together, that actually when you design for scarcity, that's actually a really compelling marketing message. Consumers are actually scrutinizing organizations for what they're doing for circularity. So there's an interesting opportunity here. That next there will be a kind of a real key moment in design, thinking about the balance between affordability and sustainability. And people again are sort of starting to recognize and challenge their own sense of convenience. So it's an interesting moment to start to kind of for organizations to have to restrike that balance between affordability and sustainability. There's certainly an opportunity, and we've seen a lot around extending the life cycle of products. There's been a huge rise in what's called the right to repair movement around technology. I'm sure many of you that spend time on machines, and it's probably all of us, are endlessly frustrated with the built-in obsolescence of many of the devices that we rely on all day, every day. There's a movement against that. UK has actually started to pass laws to build in the right to repair. But also on the fashion world, H&M has partnered with a clothing collective, things like to offer rental clothes. Like Rent the Runway's been around for a while, but this is H&M offering rental clothes to kind of, again, bring circularity into their product life cycle. So this is a moment to kind of really think about examining supply chains for circularity. Many food companies are starting to do that. They're making pledges around this. General Mills, quite noticeably, I know one of your clients, Amanda, thinking about, really making a commitment to the kind of footprint they plan to have by 2030. But I want to get back to the idea that there was that question mark at the end of the title of this trend, the end of abundance thinking. So as we examine that question mark, we have an opportunity to shift several mindsets, and the key there is to kind of capture, make sure we know that less does not have to equal loss. It's a moment to rethink how interconnected we are and how to design for circularity. And then again, that idea of decoupling innovation from new, so that we can successfully design for scarcity in a way that won't feel like we're sacrificing too much in terms of price and inconvenience. Amanda, over to you for the next trend.
Awesome. And I love that one, especially the repair trend. I've seen a ton of that pop up in retail. You mentioned H&M, and Arc'teryx is doing like, if your zipper breaks, bring it in and we'll either replace the coat or we'll replace the zipper. And they're doing it in like, cool foundry type studios. So they're making experiences out of it too, which I think is really interesting. So the next frontier is probably one of the most popular trends this year, because it touches on the metaverse. And if you're anything like me, you probably had to do a fair amount of research to wrap your head around the metaverse. So we'll start with some grounding in that. So you'll hear metaverse, you'll hear web, the new web. You'll also hear NFTs, things like that. And so there's some connectivity there, but essentially, like, the metaverse is basically a new interoperable experience that you can have. And the way that it's started to make sense for me is that you're essentially just mimicking human needs and behaviors, just in a new, physical and digital kind of channel. And I know it's not a channel, but that's how I've wrapped my head around it. And I think that's been really helpful. So, I mean, it's basically just a place where you can meet and interact. Some great examples of this are being able to kind of co-watch shows together on Netflix. It's like a real kind of analog way of engaging with others, but also digitally, which I think is just really, really terribly interesting. Um, you see a lot of this more in the gaming world, and they've been really leading the way. And you've seen Ariana Grande did a concert in the metaverse on the Fortnite platform, I believe it was. Am I making that up? I also attended, I don't know if anybody did this too, I attended the Red Hot Chili Peppers post Super Bowl concert that they had in the metaverse, which was just like really strange. So I was like wearing my little Oculus 2 headset, and you're like standing next to people. It was like really strange because I haven't been into gaming since N64, but it is really cool because you're getting this really immersive experience. You're able to really engage. You're not necessarily like touching something, but the possibilities of this are truly endless. And so a lot of brands and a lot of companies are starting to think about, how do we start to engage these communities that are already there? I think a lot of companies are also looking at the metaverse as, where is our next generation of users and how are they engaging with each other in this space, to start thinking about what's our investment strategy for experience. So if you want to go to the next slide. There's a lot to kind of unpack here. Like, if you think about where we were 20 years ago versus where we were 10 years ago, like web changed everything, then mobile changed everything, social's been changing everything, and now the metaverse is likely that next frontier, hence the name of the trend. So this we're seeing as not just, a new place to experience and engage and create a community. It's really a cultural shift. And it's going to be kind of, crazy to think about, as we start to progress through this. So the big thing, and literally every client I work with right now is saying, like, tell me what we should be doing and how we should be looking at the metaverse, whether it's in beauty or apparel or whatnot. But ultimately, the metaverse is just mimicking human behaviors and trying to meet for human needs. And I think if you break it down that way, it's much easier to understand. NFTs has been kind of a huge piece of this. And the NFT that kind of like, flipped the switch for me was, I saw that Nike had purchased a startup that was in the NFT business. And if you think about people who collect like amazing, Nike sneakers, a lot of those sit in boxes in people's closets and never really see the light of day. But it's like the hunt, it's the getting, the authenticated piece of apparel, and then it's like the having it as a part of your collection. And if you think about an NFT version of that, that potentially exists in the metaverse, you can wear those while you're, at the Red Hot Chili Peppers concert, or while you're, on a platform that exists in the metaverse. It does actually get to see the light of day. And people are willing to pay for that kind of level of authentication as well. So it's really, really interesting. For collectibles, it makes perfect sense. There are ones that are really interesting. There are people that are spending, half $500,000 on art that are NFTs. So, things that exist really only in the metaverse, not physically. But what I love is the example up here on the top is this chair. Andres made a hortensia chair that became so famous, he actually made a physical version. So it's starting to impact what shows up in the physical world as well, which is just really, honestly, so incredible. One of the things that I think could be really challenging, and I'll leave this as a provocation, is as we create yet a new medium for community and for collaboration and for, purchasing goods, interacting with people and services, how do we develop a set of standards that make sense, and how do we maybe make this the place where we can have a more equitable society? Are we just going to be designing this for the people who are going to pay the most money? Because then we perpetuate kind of the inequities that exist in our society today. Or is this really a place where we can start to create the life and the community that we actually want to live in? So I'll leave that as a provocation, because I think this could be a really, really interesting opportunity to, rather than chase the money, chase what's really meaningful and what matters, and kind of be the change we would like to see and make that a real thing in the metaverse. Martha, anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, just to build on that point, to me, and again, I feel like a old lady when I say this, because I think, but I think that the key to the metaverse having true meaning in our lives, in our real world lives, is to kind of figure out that purpose.
Yeah.
Kind of move a little bit beyond the so what. Okay, so I can have a digital shoe collection, you know, so what? And kind of be able to kind of marry that, not the novelty and the immense creativity we're going to see in the metaverse with meaning and utility. I was a designer back in the early days of e-commerce in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and the internet was the internet was new and exciting, and e-commerce was new, and it was going to be the whole new economy. That's what people called it in my industry. And but it ended up being kind of pretty amazing channel, a way of getting things done. So it kind of met that sort of utility moment. But I can tell you the metaverse came home to roost in my house, because my son used his high school graduation money to buy a digital horse, or buy a part of a digital horse that is raced whatever. It was his money. I was like, okay. It's been a good investment, I will say, though. So he knows his digital horse racing well. I don't know if I should be proud or not. But anyway, it's a really cool. We're going to see a lot of experimentation in the metaverse, and that's what's going to be really exciting over the next year or so. Yep. All right, shall I do the next trend?
Yes.
This we call "This Much Is True." This trend is about questions, and it's about trust. So I want you to ask yourself, when was the last time you asked the internet a question? I bet you did it a couple times today already. I know I did it like probably within an hour or so before joining this call. So Google has been around for 24 years, and I don't think anyone studied the amount of questions that were asked in the universe before Google. But I guarantee you that in that quarter century, we are asking just an exponentially more amount of questions than we used to. And we're calling this sort of the era of questions. Now, I mentioned I'm an anthropologist, and I kind of geek out about culture and history, but it reminds me a little bit of, like a millennia ago, when humanity didn't understand phenomena in the world. What humanity would do was kind of look to the world and engage with what we now call magical thinking, to kind of explain, oh, this is what's happening. The gods are upset or whatever, right? Then that kind of gave way to scientific thinking. And we feel like we're in this new era of questions. We don't understand phenomena in the world. What do? We ask a question of the world. So, okay, so that's kind of interesting. But what happens then? That means we're getting a lot of answers back. And you couple with that with the fact that I think probably everyone listening knows we are at an all-time high level of mistrust around the information that we receive, and around around the answers to the questions that we ask of the world. It is just a phenomenal quandary of the fact that we're asking more questions, but we fundamentally distrust the answers. So in this idea of this much is true, what this means is that trust has become like the key way to build relationships. And this is specifically poignant, we think, for those, anyone, engaging with a constituency, be it your employees, be it your customers, your consumers. And so, and people are increasingly, we saw this definitely before the pandemic, but people are increasingly scrutinizing the brands and products and services that they engage with, or their employer that they work for, to understand, do I trust this organization? Do their values match my own? And so this is becoming more and more acute as we kind of live in this era of this much is true. So if you go to the next slide, what this means is that the idea of information layers, the way that truth is revealed, has become really, really important. And so basically, customers, especially, let's think about like sort of the consumer state right now. Consumers, they definitely expect answers at multiple points of interaction with the product or service that they want to buy or engage with or learn more about. And so we think that a lot of organizations are not actually prepared to meet the moment through through information layers that then reveal sort of the truth about a product, a brand, a service. And so this is going to become increasingly, we think, the way that that brands, products, services, organizations compete, is through these information layers, through the unfolding of answers that can help cue to people that this experience can be trusted. Okay, and this is made even more complicated by the fact that there is limited space for these information layers, and of course, limited attention spans. So this is no easy fix, but it's really, really important. Around these information layers, they're going to have to be simple, easy to use. You're going to have the right information at the right time to the right person. Content design is going to be key. If a brand has a macro purpose, they need to have that purpose be part of every crumb of content that they kind of reveal to the public. Conversation design, conversational AI is going to become key here. It's going to increasingly need to happen on demand. So there's going to be a lot around here around personalization as well, sort of a way to kind of recognize, I see you, I know who you are, and customer, and I am revealing trusted information in a way that is cueing trust to you through these information layers. So this is going to be sort of the challenge for the near future, we think, this challenge around trust and competing on trust. And yes, it's very relevant for consumer-facing brands and products and services, but we think it kind of plays out across multiple ways that we engage with the world. I'm going to turn back to you, Amanda, for our last trend on care.
Excellent. So the last trend, handle with care, I feel like this is the perfect bookend, especially for this group, because I think we've all kind of experienced this in one way or another. I know from a mental health perspective, I'm so glad that we can kind of now talk about anxiety and kind of, like, hey, I'm not in the best place. And you can say those things aloud, and it's not just like a, ooh, TMI. It's oh yeah, I feel that because, I've been there too at some point in the last mega year / 2 years. So care is just everywhere now. It's at the forefront of how employers are thinking about their employees and the types of services that they provide for them. It's at the forefront of, everything that we're reading. If my favorite example is, Simone Biles withdrawing from the Tokyo Olympics, and just saying, like, my head's not right now. And if I make a small, minute mistake, I could actually physically very deeply injure myself. And this goes back to the first trend of being kind of unapologetic about it too. And there were so many people that had so many opinions about that, but I'm a huge Simone Biles fan, so fully support it. Everybody's wearing a wearable at this point. I remember when the Oura Ring came out years ago, I was sitting next to a CEO of a manufacturing company. It's his family's business. And he was telling me about this ring that he wore that should track his sleep. And I'm like, I have a Fitbit for that. Why are you wearing a $500 ring? But like, here it is, and it's here to stay. I'm also kind of addicted to my Apple Watch now at this point too. So people are wearing things to keep track of their wellness. My watch tells me every day that I need to start my day with some mindfulness. It tells me to breathe throughout the day, which bless, because I do. I need to pause and breathe, and it really helps. But if you think about kind of the root of care, it's rooted in compassion, and it's like at the root of human nature as well. So that's how humanity is defined. And I love that we're taking a little bit of a turn back towards that rather than kind of, business metrics focused. We're thinking about how are we caring for people? It goes past empathy and it goes to building trust. When we're looking at, and this applies really across the board, it's not just like people, but it's also like, how are we designing systems, technology? How are we engaging with technology as well? And actually designing with care in mind. So beyond just that empathy. We're all learning to care a little bit more for ourselves. There's a Calm app that I know that we have access to at Accenture, but you just think about all of the various things that are out there now that are really focused on that. The best thing I think in the healthcare industry, and those of you that are in the healthcare industry can probably keep me honest, has been the rise in kind of virtual appointments for certain types of appointments. I think that's been amazing. Everything from actual, like medical health to psychological support as well. And it's just been amazing because it's made it so much more accessible, and I think so much more acceptable too, to kind of seek out help when you need it. For those of us that are also in caring positions, so caring for others, it's been a really hard couple of years because you're not only caring for others, but you're realizing that you need to care for yourself. So there was a study that I think we looked at in Singapore, and probably globally, 35 to 54-year-olds have struggled both financially with their own health as they care for parents and children. So for folks in kind of the range where you're taking care of multiple generations of people, the burden is like really, really substantial financially and mentally. If we look at how companies are handling this, they're starting to hire chief health officers as well. And one of my, I think, favorite examples of how this is starting to show up even with, retailers and different companies is a focus on imperfection and celebrating that rather than perfection. If you think about, commercials and marketing, it's all, beautiful, really in shape people. That's what it used to be. I think about Rihanna's brand Fenty and kind of celebrating different body shapes and colors and sizes and kind of, gender fluidity. That's the new trend. It's really like the kind of taking care. It's, let's celebrate who we are so that we don't force ourselves into these little boxes that don't actually fit who we are. So I love that there's such a tie-in to the first trend as well there. If you want to go to the next slide, really what's next? The other thing to keep in mind as a part of this is the accessibility angle. So 15% of people have some kind of permanent disability, but 100% of us have experienced some form of temporary disability, whether you've had a procedure done, whether you've been holding a child in one arm and trying to shop at the grocery store, whether you've been pushing a stroller, but also grocery shopping at the same point, whether you've been inebriated, that's literally a temporary disability. So if you think about all of that, there's a huge untapped market, and our world is not designed for that right now. And so companies are starting to pay a lot more attention to this, not just because legally they have to, but also because there's just a lot more opportunity here. So the other great thing is how people are being rewarded and promoted who care about others. So whether it's by colleagues or customers, so how can you kind of lift people up? GoFundMe was always a thing before, but if you think about things like GoFundMe and how corporations are actually starting to pull some of those thoughts into how people interact with each other at work, rewards and kind of recognition, that has seen a huge uptick. And how do we kind of reward people for caring about others? As a part of our own performance achievement process, there is a special flag and designation for people who are exceptional people leads. So people who really deeply care about the people that they're looking after from a career perspective. And then the last piece really being, and what's next is how does this actually start to increase how we look at inclusivity as well? So not just accessibility, but true inclusivity. So, how we design things should completely change. We should think about how people are using things in context. Do we need to have voice activation? I was meeting with a client last week, and we asked a very simple question of like, what is amazing, like what does an amazing experience look like to you? And somebody said, like, I love when I get close to my car, it unlocks because it knows who I am. It's just like one less step. And it was something so simple like that probably is going to make that person buy, a Ford for the rest of their life or something around those. So if we think about care, and especially our roles as caregivers, and caretakers, there's a lot to be said, and tying this back to the first trend about making sure that that's a part of our equation. For being brave and saying, I have to take care of an aging parent. I have kids at home, so I'm not going to take that 8 p.m. meeting because that's bedtime. I think some of that requires a fair amount of bravery, but I think this world is now used to being a little bit more flexible to our needs. And so I think this is a great time to exercise that kind of personal agency and make sure that we're creating the world that we want to live in rather than living in somebody else's world. Martha, anything else you'd like to kind of leave us with to wrap us up?
No, I think you captured it beautifully. I mean, I'm just amazed at what I think about as the language of care just has permeated so much of our day-to-day life. It is true in our employment experience. I feel like we talk about care much more readily, you said at the beginning, but it's just kind of in a lot of interactions. I mean, I was on the phone with my bank, and the call center rep, closed our call saying, "Stay healthy, please take care." So, it's just kind of an interesting idea. And as you mentioned, like the Simone Biles example, just, our ability to have now conversations about mental health and wellness, which, really was not there even a year ago. So it's a tremendous change to us, as social beings, and was something, as I mentioned in the very beginning, when we do this global work, I can't tell you how many of our signals from around the world were about care and were about specifically mental wellness. So it's a very dominant global trend.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for going so deep into those 5 trends. I know today we are looking at the first and last. So we're going to just kind of take a concentrated look as come as you are and handle with care. And so in the pandemic, as we've all gone through for the past gajillion years, has changed the threshold for accepting kind of work or company toxicity. The Wall Street Journal in September of 2001 aired a podcast addressing workers completely leaving their jobs with no backup plan, which gives me anxiety. But it's happening because the game has changed. And I think, Amanda, you were saying that people are finding that they can take their talents elsewhere for someone who will kind of accept them as they are and value them as they are. How can we help companies kind of manage this, so to speak?
Ooh, that is a really, really good question. Because I think the way that we can help companies manage this is by speaking up and then acting. So I think the companies that are losing a lot of women right now are realizing like we have a problem. Especially most companies are starting to figure out how do they show up more authentically and in either employee experience or the DE&I space. Like we need to attract diverse talent. How do you do that? You can't have a toxic environment. You can't, attract talent and then not be able to keep them. So I think the only way to hold companies accountable is to speak up. And if that doesn't work, act on it. And I think many people have done that over the last years. They've spoken up and then they've left, to say like, I'm not going to wait around for this to change.
And then I think the other thing is to recognize that what's at the heart of that trend is that people have an increased sense of their own agency. So, help make, I'm the hero of my story. Do you know what I mean? and and I think, my employer should recognize that that's sort of the mindset that many people are now when they think about their career. And that's at the heart of the war for talent, kind of, embrace people as their own agent, which I think is kind of shifts a little bit the relationship between employer and employee. And I hope we'll create an environment for, as Amanda was saying, like more inclusive, more and innovative ways of having that relationship between employer and employee.
Yeah, we see there is the me versus we, and we are prioritizing ourselves more, our health, what we will accept and won't accept. However, at its core, companies are more of the we, the bigger picture, and we're focusing on ourselves. And so these things seem to not be able to coexist. Or the question is, can they? How can companies realize that me versus we mentality while still moving towards their collective objective?
Yeah, so they can coexist, but there's a very healthy and challenging tension there, I would say. And so I think the companies that are good at navigating it are the ones that are empowering their employees to kind of step into that space and contextualize the direction and strategy that company has. Like, contextualize the purpose, have a strong purpose, because people make selections on where they end up working based on, like, does this align with my values? Does this align with where I want to take my career? And so if you can articulate clearly what your purpose is and what your strategy is to get there, and then individualize that for your employees in a meaningful way, and then go ahead and empower people to go ahead and help you on that journey, I think that's a winning combination of combining both me and we. But there is a huge tension there. You're right.
And I think people are looking for both at the same time, because I think the rise in individualism, it doesn't necessarily mean we've all become selfish. I think because we're seeing, as we saw, in the Handle with Care trend as well, we have a greater appreciation for being part of a collective. So this is not an easy thing to navigate by any stretch, but I think it's important to kind of parse that out, that people, yes, I want to celebrate my own sense of agency and take care of myself in a way that I didn't know I was empowered to do it previously, but I also do recognize my commitment to the collective. I want both at the same time.
We want it all.
Yeah.
I just recently came across this very interesting thing where, while we do see in our line of work at the Mod Project that pay rates do drive job acceptance, one of the high ranking factors from a LinkedIn survey is people want to know what your company's doing in the world, like socially. And they want to see that you've done it. They don't want it to be something that you've written on your website. It's a driving factor in decision making for what are you doing in my community? How are you showing up every day? And how am I going to contribute to this? So there is some, care, I would say, if we're talking Handle with Care. We found that a lot of people, we care about everyone else because of the compassion that we came out of from the pandemic. And so we have more compassion to others and to what's happening in the world around us. And so how can brands lean into kind of caring? Like, how can we take what we've written about and translate it into here's how you contribute to the goal that we have into the community and our responsibilities socially and all these different things that most times people are like, we're hands off, we're not going to touch that, we're not going to address that. And now we're seeing that they have to lean in because that's what people want.
I mean, I think that's exactly the right, and the thing that is just in our face is that if you are an organization that say you stand for something, you have to have the actions behind it to demonstrate that you mean what you say. I mean, it sounds like an obvious piece of advice, but it is that it's a massive shift in how organizations used to show up around values and purpose. You have a much more savvy public, both your potential, the talent that you might attract, and the constituents that you want to serve, be it a consumer or a patient or whatever, that is now scrutinizing organizations where they say they stand for this, but their actions do not support that. And so it means that organizations have to have a very clear sense of purpose and then a strategy for delivering that purpose. And it means you can't stand for everything. You need to have a pretty fixed idea of what that is. Patagonia is an example of a brand that we use all the time that is a very clear sense of purpose. And then, you can see clear evidence of things that they do to support that, and sometimes at great cost to themselves as an organization. So it requires an alignment and a strategy that I don't think a lot of organizations are thinking that deeply about.
Yeah, there was a piece of research we did last year for a retailer. They wanted to understand Gen Z. And one of the, I think, most surprising things for me is that, we were talking to this, I think she was 17, and she was like, oh, I research every brand before I purchase from them. She's like, if they stand for, like, I look at their board composition, I look at their like their leadership composition. And if they say they stand for DE&I and their board and senior leadership team doesn't reflect that, like, forget about it. And I was just shocked by that, because as a 17-year-old, I was a selfish little twerp, and there was no way I was doing that research. So I'm really impressed, and it shows a lot of, I think, societal growth too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Gen Z is a lot more aware than we might give them credit for. I have a 14 and an 18-year-old in my house, and the things they're concerned about, it was not on my radar. And so as we speak about, and we'll talk about this in another kind of webinar, but as we speak about the metaverse, I think it'll be really interesting to see how that plays into, the global market and sustainability, and how does that affect, the world around us, and, in order to get buy-in from them. So that will be really interesting, but that's going to be another session that we're going to have. We do have some Q&A questions that I want to hop into in our lightning round of 2 minutes that we have here. Someone wrote a question: do you find that most of these trends resonate with most of Accenture's partners, clients, or companies? How long do you project these trends to stay in the next 5, 10 years or more?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that is special about our trends report is it is very globally applicable and across a whole host of different industries. And also, they're not intended to have the answer, so to speak. They're intended to be provocative around what the answer could be. So, for example, tomorrow I'm presenting these trends to a C-suite group of people from a food company, and I'm there to kind of make them think differently. I'm not there to tell them what's going to happen with their product. In terms of the staying power, now, at the risk of patting our team on the back, we're pretty good, man. We've got a really good track record of being very right about things over the last 15 years, and they tend to be things that we really do want to be thinking about in the next 12 to 24 months, and then in 5 years, a lot of what we have seen has become absolutely mainstream. So think of these as kind of near in, but definitely being a pretty good harbinger of the kinds of things that we're seeing coming down the pike.
Awesome. That's great. I like this question. As a working mom, how can I take this information back to my employer or ERGs to advocate for working women parents that need more flexibility at work?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the power of this come to life through like personal storytelling. And so I think like, I mean, that's how people build empathy is by like having a personal story either told to them or they witness it. And so that's kind of the approach that I've taken. I've asked other folks to take from the team too, is just, like be honest about like what you need, be honest about what's going on. I'm a private person, so some of that's been a little bit hard for me. And I think that's why I struggled so much at the beginning of the pandemic. But those are really powerful stories because they're personal. People, especially if it's people that they can really kind of empathize with. I know you in this context, but I didn't know you in that context too. And I think painting the whole picture helps people see you as a full person. We had this Truly Human campaign a few years ago, which originally made me laugh, but now, I mean, it's true. It's showing up as yourself, as your full self, and kind of being unapologetic about it. So I think storytelling is really helpful there, to build that empathy, and then ask for what you want, ask for what you think people need, and be that change agent if you can and if you have the energy for it.
It's the key part. If you have the energy for it, we're all, like you said in the beginning, we're all pretty damn tired.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to thank Amanda and Martha for sharing these fjord trends with us. Super insightful. Like I mentioned, we are going to have a second session where we will discuss trends 2, 3, and 4. So we have a quick poll. If you'd like to let us know which ones you'd like us to address next, we'd love your feedback, and we'll take that into consideration and look out for the next session with these two amazing women. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.